I witnessed my husband cheating. I think it's rare for someone to have that experience. Most people would probably confront their husband after finding proof of their infidelity on their phone. However, I saw it with my own eyes. And it happened in a place and at a time when I never imagined that so many people would witness it. Well, I have always felt suspicious about their relationship, but I never expected to witness my husband cheating in such a public place. My name is Christina. I'm a stay-at-home mom with a 6-year-old son. The day I witnessed my husband cheating, he had the day off from work, and we had planned to go out as a family, but when I woke up, my husband was already gone. I received a message from him saying,
"I'm going to take care of my sister, who has a fever of 102.2 degrees Fahrenheit. It seems like no one is home today, so I'll be back in the evening."
A message saying that came in. I let out a big sigh. I had told my son that we were going to an amusement park today, and he had been looking forward to it since the day before. I had heard that my husband had been put in charge of a big project recently, and he hadn't had a break in the last 6 months. So this was supposed to be a rare chance for our family to spend time together. But he went to take care of his sister instead. She's supposed to have a fiancé, so he could have left her to take care of herself. Besides, my husband has a sister complex. The reason he started dating me? It was because he said I looked like his sister and was wonderful. I remember feeling uneasy about that. I had met his sister a long time ago, and she was a very beautiful and kind person. So I guess looking like her is the highest praise my husband could give me. But I couldn't help feel creeped out by it. My husband used to say,
"I want a boy and a girl."
And he frequently initiated sex. But since our son was born, the frequency has decreased noticeably. Now, it's non-existent. We're still young, and my husband used to be a person who enjoyed sex. So I suspect he might be doing it with someone else instead of me. Well, I could forgive him for betraying me. It's annoying, isn't it? But the problem is that he disappears, even on days when he has off from work, like today. It wouldn't hurt to play with our child occasionally, even on a day off. Our child is daddy's boy, and he starts crying when he realizes his dad isn't around. My husband is too indifferent toward our child. He doesn't even prepare birthday presents, and he doesn't even attend school events, no matter how much free time he has. Sometimes he comes home early, but he immediately locks himself in his room and plays games nonstop. He hardly sees my son's face anymore. At this rate, my son, who used to be a daddy's boy, will start to see his father as a stranger. Oh, and my husband said he was busy with a big project. That was a lie. Because he was rarely home, I asked a former classmate who works at the same company as my husband, "Is my husband really that busy?" I've heard that before. "No way. If anything, your husband is known as a window-side employee who doesn't have much work and always looks bored. He goes home on time every day." They told me this while laughing. I thought, I knew it. That's exactly what I thought. After all, he was supposedly in charge of a big project, but his salary was still around $1,500, and he didn't look tired from working overtime. In fact, he looked rather well rested. This also made me suspect he was cheating. Carrying a ton of dissatisfaction, I finished preparing breakfast. I checked the time and tilted my head. Strange. Normally, even if I don't wake him up, my son would be up by 7 a.m. But it was already past that time. If we didn't hurry, he'd miss the nursery school bus, so I rushed to wake him up. In his room, he was still asleep. So I tried to wake him up by saying, "It's morning, wake up!" Instead of a response, all I heard was a pained groan. Worried, I reached out to touch my son's face and felt his forehead. It was very hot. I called my son's name and gently shook his shoulder. He barely opened his eyes and said, "Mom, I can't breathe," he told me. I almost panicked. At that time, there was an outbreak of a disease at the nursery school, and I couldn't help but think, could it be my son too? I had heard that there were cases where children died, so I seriously thought my son might not make it. I tried to call my husband in desperation, but he didn't answer at all. With no time to wait for a reply to an email, I contacted my mother to ask her for first aid advice. She was a nurse, so I thought it was best to ask an expert. Following my mother's accurate instructions, I quickly prepared an ice pillow and measured my son's temperature. It was over 102.2 degrees Fahrenheit. I called an ambulance and made sure my son drank plenty of water while waiting for it to arrive. According to my mother, there was a possibility of heat stroke as well. Considering the risk of infection, I wasn't allowed to ride in the ambulance, so I called a taxi and headed to the hospital where my son would be taken. During that time, I kept calling my husband, even though I knew it was pointless. As expected, it was useless. With no other choice, I left a message online, hoping he'd see it and come if he was responsible enough. Upon arriving at the hospital, I waited in the hallway outside the emergency treatment room, praying for my son's treatment to be over. In the past, my father had been taken into an emergency treatment room and never made it out alive. What if my son doesn't make it either? As I imagined the worst, my mother, who had come to support me, encouraged me. "It'll be okay. It'll be okay." And then, an hour later, my son was saved. But they said it was best for him to be hospitalized for a week. So he was taken to a hospital room. In the end, my husband didn't come home that day. The next day, I went back home to get some clothes for my son and decided to bring him some fruit as a get-well gift. I thought I'd also greet the doctor who had helped us the day before, so I passed by the emergency treatment room. But suddenly, the area became chaotic. Did someone get brought in? Thinking I might be in the way, I decided to postpone my greeting to the doctor. As I was about to go to my son's room, I saw a man and a woman on a stretcher. They were barely covered with a thin blanket and looked almost naked. It seems they're still joined together. It seemed they were stuck together during intercourse. I had never experienced it, but it must be tough. But being transported like this must be so embarrassing. And I was thinking this and trying to pass by. I made eye contact with the man. Under normal circumstances, it would be an awkward situation. But it was different for me. I froze. That's because the man was my husband. "What are you doing here?" I exclaimed in surprise.
Well, I caught my sister's cold and,
My husband was at a loss for words. At that moment, I was also confused. What were the odds that my husband would be here after my son was just brought in yesterday? Why was he naked and being transported? And who was the woman he was with? Various thoughts were swirling in my head. During my confusion, I made eye contact with the woman my husband was with. Even in my disarray, I knew this woman was my husband's affair partner. As I glared at her, I realized that her face looked very familiar. "Why on earth is Christina here?" It was that voice that reminded me. That's right. The woman was my husband's sister, Brenna. The events of that moment felt incredibly slow. I had been suspicious that my husband was lying about taking care of his sister and meeting another woman. But I hadn't expected this. Even if he came to visit our son, he shouldn't have arrived stuck together with a woman. And that woman was his own sister? This is just too much. Since they were being carried away on a stretcher, I had to suppress my urge to confront them and wait for their treatment. They wouldn't be able to escape anyway, so I decided to confront them later. With those thoughts, I went to visit my son, my original purpose, with a sick feeling deep inside my chest. I spent some time in my son's room, trying to sort out my feelings. When I checked my phone, there were tons of messages from my husband online. As expected, they were all trying to cover up the situation. He didn't even mention our son being in the hospital. I decided to keep ignoring him and then waited another hour. The doctor who had taken care of my son yesterday appeared. The doctor smiled at me and said,
"Your son is very healthy. He seems to be recovering faster than we thought."
His fever had gone down and his condition had completely stabilized. Initially, we were worried about an infection, but it turned out he had heat stroke along with a cold.
"Did you make him drink a lot of water? That was the right thing to do. Your son must be happy to have such a smart mother."
The doctor even praised me like that. It was more thanks to my mother. I should give her some fancy meat as a present next time. I deeply bowed to the kind doctor and expressed my gratitude. But it wasn't hard to imagine that I'd soon face a huge ordeal. Just as I was relieved about my son's condition, my anger was bubbling up inside of me. Mama's face is scary. I scared my son. I quickly put on a smile and told my son, "I'll be back soon." As I left the hospital, I called my husband, who had left over 100 missed calls. The moment he answered the phone, he started making excuses.
"It wasn't what it looked like. There was a reason."
And so he started making excuses. He got his priorities wrong. Shouldn't he be worried about our son first? Well, there was no way a man who was so engrossed in an act with his own sister, without caring about our son, would worry about him. With a husband like this, I worried about our son's future. I couldn't see my husband's personality improving, so I decided to divorce him. Life might be tougher, but I can do it for my son's sake. So, you were busy with that even when our son was suffering, huh? I bet you were doing it whenever you had free time, right? And with your own sister? That's just disgusting, I said to him. He was speechless. I continued. "Oh, and by the way, I've already reported this to your parents. I won't tell your company, though. It would be a problem if you couldn't pay alimony and child support. So, goodbye." With that, I said my final words to my husband. 3 days later, my son's health had fully recovered earlier than expected. So I completed the discharge procedure and returned home with my beloved son after a long time. Of course, my husband wasn't there. After that incident, my husband came to apologize in person, but I handed him the divorce papers I had already signed. He begged for forgiveness, saying, "This was the first time. Forgive me for just one mistake. You're all I have." But in a cold voice, I told my husband, "You're still lying at this point. I already know everything. Your sister confessed it all." Yes, I anticipated that my husband wouldn't agree to a divorce easily. So to silence him, I first approached his sister, who was involved in the affair. "Dear sister-in-law, I heard you're going to have a wedding ceremony with your boyfriend soon. Congratulations." "Ah, thank you." I wanted to send a congratulatory message, but I came up with a great story. Want to know what it is? "You're not planning to tell everyone about this, are you?" "Yes. I want everyone to know what kind of person you are. This will make it clear in one go." I smirked. "Please don't do that. It would ruin my life." Pretending to consider, I continued with a smile. "Well, I guess I have no choice. How about this? I'll keep quiet about this if you'll tell me in details how many times you did it with my husband. Then I'll keep quiet. Of course, your brother will still feel betrayed. What will you do?" Without hesitation, my sister-in-law confessed everything. "Please don't tell him. I'll tell you everything." And she easily confessed everything. When I told my husband about it, he fainted from the shock of being betrayed by the sister he loved more than anyone else. After waking up, he signed the divorce papers and left the house with a heavy heart. From there, I went through a lawyer to demand a divorce, custody of our son, alimony, and child support from my husband. He initially haggled over the amount, but when I whispered in his ear, "Do you want me to spill the beans to your company?" he replied,
"All right, I'll pay the amount you requested."
He left the lawyer's office. After that, for some reason, his company found out about the incident, and he was called in and severely reprimanded. A month later, my husband got fired from his job and now works at a food factory, putting strawberries on cakes to pay for alimony and child support. For some reason, people at the factory knew what he did, and he's always the subject of rumors among young girls, making him feel uncomfortable. As for my husband's sister, despite me not revealing the truth, the whole incident came to light, and her engagement was called off. Apparently, her boyfriend, who suspected her of cheating just like me, had hired a private investigator to check on her. She was demanded a large amount of money as compensation for this broken engagement, and now she works at a nightclub. The other day, her ex-boyfriend gave me a photo of them in the act, saying,
"Use it if you need to."
I wondered what kind of nerve he had to give such a thing to a woman like me, but I decided to keep it in my drawer. In case my husband contacts me or tries something, I'll gratefully use it. I moved back to my parents' house for a fresh start, and am raising my son with their help. My parents, who lived far away, were sad that they couldn't see their grandson often, so they offered to help as much as possible. I don't want to rely on them too much, so I'll only lean on them when I need to. By the way, my son has been in perfect health since that high fever, as if it never happened, and has been awarded for the perfect attendance for 3 years now. He seems to have completely forgotten about his biological father and enjoys every day. That makes me happier than anything else. Oh, I almost forgot. Our family has grown. It's Angel, the white cat sleeping comfortably on my lap. When I went to say goodbye to Angel, who often came to play in my yard before moving, he jumped onto my lap as usual and then stayed still like a statue. I was sad to part with Angel, so I brought him with me to my parents' house. Now he's close with my parents, and he's just as important to me as my son. From now on, I want to watch my son grow up warmly, with my parents and Angel. That's what I think about as I sit here in the rocking chair on the porch, stroking Angel.